You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players, and all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Welcome back to Arsenal Pass, episode 129. This is Bright Lights, the limited set review, Brendan. As we do every time there's a new limited set release, we go through our takes on the cards from the limited standpoint as we head towards pre-release this weekend, all things to get you ready for pre-release, and then as we enter into the first of this new limited format with a few additions to how this limited format is going to play with the new Crack Shuffle play, Brendan. You looking forward to pre-release this weekend? Looking forward to crack shuffling and playing some Bright Lights?
I am. I was actually supposed to go to a tournament in Houston, but I think I will stay home instead because my teammate, who will not be named, can't go. Hayden, I want to ask you a question. I'm going to zoom out to 10,000 feet. Check that off your bingo card if you're an Arsenal Pass listener. I want to ask you, how do you feel now looking at Bright Lights, assigning your grades to the cards? How do you feel about evaluating this format from that 10,000 foot view level, from the high level, the macro level, the aggregate, as people say? So I'm just trolling some of our usual listeners here. How hard is it to evaluate Bright Lights versus some other sets in the past? You know, trying to get an idea of how you think the format will actually shake out in terms of like what is powerful, what is not, etc. What are your sort of top level impressions of the set?
I think this as a limited format is a little bit more complex, I think, at least on the surface, than some of our previous limited formats. And I think, Outsiders, we had 6 different heroes, 3 classes, and that felt, I think, like it looked like it was going to be maybe make it quite complex, but the mechanics and the gameplay to a degree were reasonably approachable, I think. I'm not sure it's going to feel the same with Bright Lights in a good way. I think this format looks super interesting. I think the fact that we have one class, and all cards are mechanologists adds to the playability level, right? So you're going to be able to play basically all of your cards. But what does that mean?
Yeah.
So and that's the really interesting thing, because in this format, you've got a mechanic like boost, which we'll talk about. So you're going to be managing your deck. You're going to be managing your damage. You're going to be managing your almost like these setup kind of phases of the game with your hero ability. And then you've got your weapons that come into it. And these weapons are really interesting and not super straightforward to get the most value out of. So I think this format is going to be very, very dynamic, I think, and we're going to learn a lot about it in the first 2 weeks. Like, we're going to grade the cards based on our gradings we're giving and where we kind of feel about this limited format. And a lot of that is hypothesis, right? Like, we haven't got to pre-release yet. We haven't had a lot of time to play with these cards and to get games under our belt. So I think it's going to evolve. It's like at pre-release, I'm sure a lot of people are going to be putting a lot of cards in the deck. And is it the right thing? I think it really comes down to balancing off your payoff cards, which we're going to talk about as we go through kind of what some of these payoff cards are, because pushing damage in this format and finding ways to push damage is going to be, I think, really, really key.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Can't wait to see how many people put in a copious amount of 0 block cards into their deck starting off on previous weekend. Yeah.
There is a reasonable amount of 2 blocks in this in this set, though. So, I think there is definitely a balance. But mechanologist, of course, means there's a lot of 3 blocks. But like you just said, right, a lot of items, a lot of 0 blocks. I think item management and how many items you play in your deck and the reasons you play them, you're going to have really good reasons for playing the items in your deck, I think. Like, you're not just slapping items in your deck just because. Like, they need to have a reason to be in your deck. A lot of them are super synergistic, which we'll get to. So that's my view on Bright. I'm super excited about this format. I think as time's gone on, I think I said this on a pod a couple weeks ago, when I first kind of, heard about Bright Lights, I was like, I don't know about that. Like, as a limited player, that sounds a lot less exciting. And as we've gotten to see, especially this preview weekend, I'm now feeling very, very excited for Bright Lights, particularly in limited, but also for constructed. Yeah,
I'm interested in Outsiders specifically. So the last limited format, there was some standout cards for me. There were some clear bombs, some clear A's. I don't know if I found any, but definitely not as many in Bright Lights.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm interested to get to the grades then. I think we can talk about this, we can talk about some of the most difficult cards to evaluate are cards like the Evos, because of the return on your cost, and then also the synergistic cards, so some of the items. But yeah, let's if you haven't listened to an Arsenal Pass set review before, then we're going to break down exactly how we do these set reviews. But Brendan, I guess before that, anything you kind of want to add on Bright Lights? I mean, we put up our preview card, so we had a very interesting preview card that went up over the weekend.
Yeah.
Fabricate, which I still don't know how good this card is going to be constructed. But
yeah, people say Art of War for Mechanologist.
It's not that.
Yeah,
not
I had
that,
people
Brennan.
DMing me actually in Discord, and they're like, "Do you think the Fabricate's actually a good card?" And I'm like, "That was not my spoiler card. That was Hayden's spoiler card. First of all, don't ask me that question." No, I mean,
Deflecting.
I'm pretty interested in Teklovossen. Considering the Demi Hero that was recently spoiled, that looks like a cool deck. Will it be gatekept by the current powerful heroes that exist in the class constructed metagame? Most likely. But Fabricate gets me excited in that deck. And honestly, the heroes that have been revealed in Bright Lights are pretty complicated, so they're hard to really wrap your head around before you actually get to sort of feel and play with some of the cards, especially when you start thinking about a new classic constructed deck in the form of Teklovossen, or even something like the new Dash.io, Data Dash, whatever you want to call her.
Mm-hmm.
I call it Future Sight Dash.
Future Sight Dash. This new set is so interesting because it's a single class set, and I think the kind of perception might be, well, that would probably mean that it's one of the more simple sets, right, to approach.
Yeah.
But I think it's pretty clear right now from the preview weekend we've just seen that it's going to be one of the most complex sets in terms of at least depth-wise. Maybe some of the heroes, maybe Maxx Nitro isn't going to be that complex, for instance. But I think Teklovossen Dash.io definitely will be, and it's one of the deepest sets. I think on the surface it looks like now from what we've seen this weekend, one of the deepest sets we've had in Flesh and Blood.
Yep.
Could be wrong, right? When we get a few weeks down the road, but that's the way it seems so far.
I mean, I was saying to Hayden before he hopped on this podcast, which I said about Outsiders too, because Outsiders had cards that looked like they were power crept in terms of actual value. I mean, we call it the Ranger treatment at this point. We have a sort of a retrospective word for it. Looking at Bright Lights, initial impressions are that it looks like the Flesh and Blood design team they've come out of this sort of incubation phase and they're ready to stretch design again and take some risks. I think we went through a period there where we were playing it close to the chest with a lot of the card design and hero design. It looks like they're willing to stretch that a bit. Are these heroes and are these cards just fundamentally more powerful than other options that are available in the game? I think not, but in terms of synergistic decks, we have a lot more to work with. So there may be a reason to hop off all of the generic cards and the ice and sort of the resource taxing that's currently happening in class constructed. I do think there's a possibility that although these heroes might be powerful, synergistic, very fun to play, very cool, fresh design, they might be gatekept by some of those the current top tier decks. But we will see. We will see how things land, So these decks, like specifically Dash, the database Dash or whatever, I mean, the ceiling on that is very high, and then if you look at Teklovossen, obviously we have the Demi Hero and stuff. It looks crazy.
Well, we're here to talk about Limited
on
this episode. If you haven't heard one of our Limited pods before, our preview pods, then let's jump straight into it and talk about some of the ways that we break this down. So we can start with our rating scale. So we work on an A, B, C, D, plus some, I guess, kind of side grades system. Going to talk a little bit about A's. These are the best cards. These are the cards that you want to be the focal points of your decks in Limited. These are the things that, like Brennan just referred to as bombs, potentially. These are the cards that are going to pull you into a class, into a hero, or traditionally a class, but now a hero, or into a particular archetype within this draft format, we might want to say, with just the mono nature of Mechanologist. These are cards like Crippling Crush, Hardened Cross Trap, Drone of Brutality, when that was printed in limited sets. And things like Uprising might be Red Finals, Fighting Spirit, Sash of Sandakai. We look at Outsiders, Death Touch Red, Infectious Host Red, Shakedown. These are the sort of cards that are going to get A grades typically. And then your Bs, these are your above average role players. These are the cards that are going to be important to your overall strategy for any given hero, or just be above the kind of average rate of cards in your deck slightly. These cards are important to overall strategy for any given hero. These are the cards that are going to be, just efficient, above rate. And you're going to want a lot of these, or as many as you can pick up in your deck. So, we've just revisited Monarch for National Season. Think of cards like Take Flight Red, Warmonger's Recital, Gallantry Gold, although Gallantry Gold actually on reflection might have been an A. Sink Below Red though, right? Just good return rate, Scar for a Scar. If we look at Outsiders, I think Red Twin Twisters, Red Infecting Shot, fit, and Infect Red fit into this category. And then your Cs, these are your true role players. This is what the majority of your deck is going to be made up of in Limited. These are the cards that are just they're going to help you support your overall game plan. They're going to help you with your defensive turns. They're going to help you maybe from a resource standpoint. They're going to be slightly flexible. They're going to help you get through, kind of mid games. And they're just going to be your bread and butter. So if I think about cards like Brain Freeze Blue in Uprising, Dust Runner Outlaw, Moraga, and if I think to Outsiders, Sedate Red, Surging Strike Red, even Yellow, Skybound Shot, Spire Sniping Blue. These are the kind of cards that are going to be your Cs. And then your Ds, these are the cards you want as little of as possible in your deck. These are going to be pure filler. These are going to either be used as just a resource card in your deck. Maybe it blocks for 2 and it's some sort of block that you want in your deck. Memorial Ground has come to mind in previous sets in Monarch, for instance. If I look at Outsiders, I think Bleed Out Yellow is an example of this. Brush Off Blue, or at least Yellow in a lot of circumstances. Spinning Wheel Kick Blue. These are sort of some of the cards I think you want the least amount of in your deck, and these are your Ds. And then we have a couple of cards which we're definitely, side grades, which we're definitely going to talk about with this set in particular, I think, which is setup grades. So cards that require you to have particular other cards in your deck or have a particular archetype, and that are then going to increase the power of that card. And then you also have sideboard grades, so cards that are purely sideboard cards. So I think when it comes to setup cards, I'm thinking cards like, Amplifying Arrow, for instance. Toxicity to an extent gets better with the right deck. Bonds of Ancestry obviously requires other cards to go with it to really get the payoff of a card that's a little bit weaker by itself. And then sideboard grades, we're thinking about things like maybe Yellow Infectious Host or Yellow Peace of Mind in Outsiders, but it could have been cards like Sotomorrow Red, for instance, or Rites of Replenishment in Tales of Aria if you played that format, which is, I now realize on my notes, a few sets ago, Brendan, a few limited sets ago. It's almost 2 years ago.
Boomer format. Format.
Very, very true. And then general kind of set callouts before we get into it. So there is a lot of returning keywords in this set. We have Boost returning. We have Blade Break, Temper, Battle Worn, Transform, Steam Counters, Overpower, which I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot. Opt is in this set as well. Construct as a type and items as a type. You can see a lot of those. And then we have a lot of new ability effects, keywords, and types as well. So we've got a new weapon type and wrench, Brendan. Crank is a new keyword, so I'm just going to cover quickly some of these keywords so we don't have to explain them as we go through. So Crank is a new keyword, and this says, as this enters the arena, you may remove a Steam counter from it. If you do, gain an action point. So when we talk about Crank, as we go forward, we won't read out what Crank does. We also have Galvanize. Galvanizes when this defends, destroy an item you control to give the card +2 defense. We also have Scrap as the other keyword as well. So this is an additional cost. You may banish an item or equipment from your graveyard, and then you'll get an effect off Scrap, which we will talk about the effects on each card, but we won't say what Scrap does. And then what are the other ones we want to make sure we cover here? I mean, we've obviously the equipments. If you've seen any of the previews so far, base equipments, Evos. So Evos are mechanologist action equipment subtype, and all objects that they evolve or take over from go under. So the Evos go on top of the object. So that's just relevant for some of the cards. It's how you do banish things from underneath. And then Evo Upgrade. Evo Upgrade is a keyword where the card gets a certain perk for a number of Evos, which we'll go through as well. Anything else I've missed there, Brendan?
Nope. That's it. I want to just point out my favorite part of Arsenal Pass set reviews, which is the average defensive value of the set. Hayden, what is the average defensive value of Bright Lights, and how does it compare to previous limited sets?
Great question, and the answer is I haven't done it. I because of we're recording directly after the final previews have come out. I haven't had a chance to calculate the average defense value. But what we might do is we might try and add this in the notes below on the pod. So if you're watching this on YouTube, this will be down in the notes below. Brendan's put me in the spot. But for reference, Outsiders was 2.36, Uprising was 2.41, and Monarch was 2.24, and Tails was 2.26. So these factor all commons and rare cards at their distribution value and the average defensive value of expected defensive value of a card. So you can see that Uprising has been amongst the best we've had so far. A lot of 3 blocks in that format, obviously with Dromai, with obviously Ninja bringing it down, but Wizard and Dromai being in there massively. And then for Outsiders, Ninja plus a lot of the generics and the hybrid cards had a lot of 2 defense value. This one's gonna be interesting because we have a lot of no block value in this set. But we also have a lot of 3s. So my gut feeling this is going to land somewhere around, especially from what I've just looked at so far and hearing people sort of playing some early games and the ability you need to push damage. I feel this is going to be closer to Uprising than Outsiders, but it always kind of falls. Monarch has been the lowest, but it's always fallen within kind of a 0.2 value so far.
I feel like all the 0 blocks in the set probably just turbo the number down, but it's like not exactly representative of I don't know, the way the format is actually going to play out, because I feel like people will use heuristics to sort of base how many items they have in their deck. So like, I'm not playing more than X items, whether it's 2 or 3, and then maybe it changes if you're playing Dash Database. But if you look at the actual math on the set, the defensive value of the set, because it accounts for items, it'll be something like, maybe like 1.9, right? Which is not going to be representative of what you're going to be playing against when you play against another deck, because other players, they're not simply opening up all their packs, slamming their packs together. They're making conscious decisions to put X amount of items in their deck.
Mm-hmm. I mean, correct shuffle and play, it will be, but for traditional sealed and draft, no, you can have access to, like, because of being all mechanologist cards, you're going to have all playable cards or close to playable cards, right? So you can, crack bauble ain't gonna be relevant in this set, right? You know what I mean? Like, it's a very different kind of format to what we've played previously. So yeah, that is very true. But also, I think one thing is that not all items have cycles. So, and there is a lot of rares. So I think the average defensive value isn't going to be as low as that. But also the average defensive value played is going to be higher than what it is anyway. Anyway, so I think overall just less relevant than it has been in previous formats to look at the average defensive value, because I think you're right. The average defensive value played and the average defensive value of your pool is going to be, there's going to be a disconnect between those two numbers.
Yeah.
All right. The last thing is tokens. So quicken returns, but we also have Hyperdriver as a token, which is made by Maxx himself, Maxx Nitro. And then we also have the proto base equipment. So these are available to everyone to start. This is important to note. These are available to everyone to start in your pools. So you can have access to the head, the chest, the arms, the legs of the proto base equipment. And that allows you to, not have to draft Evos plus base equipment. But there is other base equipment in the set, which we're obviously going to talk about. Let's get into it, Brandon. Let's talk about the heroes and their weapons. I think one thing just to start with is super interesting that weapons get locked to heroes other than Teklovossen, right? So Dash, IO, and Nitro, Maxx Nitro have access to 2 weapons, and Teklovossen has access to just 1 weapon in the token slot.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that because I thought that the Banksy weapon, which we'll go over, you might actually be playing in some of the other decks if it had been possible. So it makes sense why they locked it to each hero, because that was the clearest floor value.
Yeah, do you want to kick us off and so we'll go through the heroes and the weapons so everyone's aware of what they do?
Yep, sure. So first off here we have Dash Database. Dash Database is a mechanologist young hero, 4 intellect, 18 health, and says you may look at the top card of your deck at any time. Once per turn, you may play a mechanologist item with cost 0/1 from the top of your deck. As though it were an instant, it costs 1 additional resource to play. Key things to note here, it says once per turn, and of course 0 or 1 from the top of your deck. And I'm just going to quickly go over the weapon as well. So the weapon is Symbiosis Shot. It is dash specialization. It is a 2-handed gun, attacks for 2. It says action, remove a steam counter from this attack. And it says whenever a mechanologist item enters the arena under your control, if this has fewer than 6 steam counters, you may put a steam counter on it. Very interesting condition. Maybe alluded to some powerful things yes, you might have been able to do prior to that.
Combos.
All right, Hayden, from a high level, where do you see Dash Database, or do you want me to go over the other heroes for context as well?
No, let's just quickly talk about Dash and Symbiosis Shot, the weapon and hero tied together. I think 18 intellect, 18 intellect, 18 health obviously is relevant in this format. And we've seen, heroes with less health in previous formats, like Icelander, for instance. And it has been relevant, right? Benji, for instance. So you really want your hero ability to be able to offset that to life pretty quickly. It can depend on the pace of the format, I think, but pretty quickly you want to be able to get that back. And then the reason you want to play a hero like that is then you can make the value up, right? Mm-hmm. I think if you're looking at a kind of more value-oriented way. And, being able to play almost like often with free 5-card hands, right? Like being able to play cards off the top of your deck is powerful. You are going to want to make sure these items are going to be impactful to the game, right? Because like we talked about before at the top of the pod, these no blocks are going to be a hindrance in your deck. You're going to have to be really careful about how many you play. But if you're able to play powerful ones off the top of your deck as, almost like a 5th card in your hand, a couple of times a game, you don't need to be doing this every turn, but if you're able to do this a couple of times a game and get impact, you're going to get really good value from this hero ability. And also, just looking at the top card of your deck and knowing what you're going to draw next turn isn't nothing. Like, it is relevant. It can help you make some decisions about a potential arsenal, for instance, for setting up a turn the following turn, knowing at the top card you're going to draw. But yeah, I think if you can get kind of 2 to 4 triggers off this dash, or ability to play an item, an extra fifth, additional card, basically saying pay 1, draw a card, and playing it is very good. And also at instant speed, right? Like that is, which is, it can be hard to get these items into play with action points, and dash allows you to instant speed.
2 times a turn cycle, by the way. So you can do it on your turn and your opponent's turn. That's pretty critical. My thoughts on dash database is that it will be the worst hero in crack shuffle play. I think that it's tough to evaluate. Yeah, it's tough to evaluate in draft as well, because being able to play that 5-card hand and potentially play both on your side of the turn cycle and your opponent's for cheating out an item, very, very powerful. But it also means you have to have some sort of density of items in your deck, and therefore you will most likely, almost guaranteed, draw some of them at some of the time. So if other heroes in the format like Maxx Nitro are able to put pressure on you, they will punish you for that. And you do start at 18 life, which is close to the equivalence of being a card down, right? If you were starting at 20. So I think the dash database is the one I would be looking at last, to be honest. I do think in draft there's a lot of potential for it, but overall it just seems like you're going to be taking on a lot of risk for maybe not enough payoff, but it really depends on the speed of the format. But I do think that this format is going to be pretty fast, so I don't know.
I think this is the thing, right? This format could be fast, but you have to balance off. Like, say you're a boost aggro deck, right? You have to balance off not being fatigued, which means you probably end up playing more cards in your deck, which means you have less powerful turns, which, like, there's this whole kind of interactivity between your deck size, the power of your deck.
But you can pre-board, right? So, like, let's say you're up his dash database, right? So you play 30 cards. You play 30 balls to the wall cards, and you assume your dash database opponent is not just juking you out dash database. Like, they are playing some number of items, and they will have a critical minimum or maximum of 0 blocks in your deck. And then I think that, due to all the cards being mechanologists, when you do face another a opposing hero, whether it's a mirror or something like a Teklovossen, you can adjust your deck from there. So I think that you can actually just kind of freely exploit dash database from the boost side. I think it's unlikely to be fatigued.
But I think the opposite. I feel the opposite from dash. I feel from a dash database side, because you have so many playable cards. I also don't think you need to play a million items in dash database. Like, I'm thinking kind of off the top of my head to start with, I'm going to be looking at like a couple in blue, items that are good resources that also have some impact to the game and I can get value from. And then I'm also from there looking at maybe like max like 4 to 5 items, I think. Like, I want to trigger this ability a couple of times in the game, but like, this is my take to start with. I could be, I could change this next week. Like, I might be like, I want a lot more items in this to make sure that I can reliably trigger this like multiple times a game. But like, I don't want to be diluting my deck with bad cards, and some of these items I think are not particularly good. Also, one thing I want to point out, 2 things. I think Symbiosis shot might be the most powerful weapon. Like, a weapon that doesn't cost you anything is really powerful, right? And you don't have to just play weapons off the top of your deck. Like, you can play them from your hand. That's the other thing we should definitely point out. You're not just going to play your items just off dash's ability. You are just going to play your items, get the triggers, get setup turns happening, and then you've got this weapon that doesn't cost you. Is really powerful. And the other thing is, don't play items during your opponent's turn most of the time. That's not going to be good. Like, if you have an item on top of your deck, a lot of the time your decision is going to be, I'm not playing that item. Like, because you have to pitch for it, because it costs you 1 extra to play. So even if it's a 0 cost item, you're pitching for it, and then you're not resource efficient. Like, the way you want to be using dash all the time is like pitch a blue to play an attack, and then flip an item off the top. And then you've basically played like let's say you played a 2 for 5 or something, or a 2 for 6 off a blue, and then you flip a 0 cost item off your deck. You've effectively played a 2-card hand that's dealing 6 damage and getting you an item on the table. Like, that's really powerful. That's what you want to be doing with dash. So playing your opponent's turn, unless it's like combat related or going to save you something somehow, is not good, just to point out.
Yeah, I think you're correct. The funny thing about Fab is how contextual it can be when evaluating a hero like this, because I think that the way I originally evaluated it was like, players are going to put in too many items, and they won't get enough value out of it. Like, that's a valid way of building the deck potentially, but then the deck can also go paradoxical, right? Where this could actually be the fatigue deck of the format because of the weapon, because of how the weapon interacts, where, maybe dash IOs are just putting a couple items at max in there, just getting value out of it 1 or 2 times. That's enough. And then they're getting enough steam counters on something like Symbiosis shot, and they are both fatigue you out because they have this weapon that doesn't cost them resources. So yeah, always
usually.
Yeah. Hard to evaluate. All right, do you want to go on to Maxx Nitro here?
Yeah, so Maxx Nitro is another mechanologist hero, young, 20 health, 4 intellect. Says once per turn action, 2 resources, create a hyperdriver token with 2 steam counters on it, activate this ability only if you've boosted this turn. And important to note that the Hyperdriver token is the same as the Hyperdriver card. It is a token that says at the start of, so when you boost, once per turn, when you boost, remove a Steam counter from this and gain a resource. And then when there's no Steam counters on it, destroy it. Hyperdrivers you control get Crank, is also what Maxx Nitro says. And Crank we already talked about.
All right, and the weapon?
Weapon, Banksy. Interesting name for the weapon. This is a mechanologist weapon, wrench, two-handed. It attacks for 3. It is a max specialization. It says once per turn action, 1 resource attack. Activate this ability only if you've cranked this turn. And when this hits a hero, put a Steam counter on an item you control with Crank. I know. What are your thoughts first on Maxx Nitro?
Seems good. It seems like the more aggressive deck. Our rate starts at 20 health for intellect, of course. But I don't know, Hyperdriver seems like something you get a lot of value out with. If you're able to end the turn with something like Banksy, you can effectively refund that resource that you paid to swing the weapon, right? By putting another Steam counter on a Hyperdriver. So I don't know. This is sort of the hero that looks the most linear to me, right? It's the easiest one to evaluate, easiest one to maybe get value out of. Seems like what I'd be gravitating towards in something like a crack shuffle play or even early draft pods. I think Maxx Nitro is what I'd be looking at. You
just donk. Yeah, I mean, I think this is the easiest to look at the play patterns for, because I think what you want is on your turn is you want to pitch a blue, you want to activate your action. You want to play a 1 cost boost card. You want to activate this to create your Hyperdriver, and then you want to play like a 0 cost and then attack with your weapon afterwards if you can, right? Like those are the kind of play. So 1 cost and 0 cost boost cards are going to be super important to Maxx Nitro for those play patterns. So you can, like I just said, pitch your blue, either play your 0 cost first or your 1 cost afterwards, create your Hyperdriver token, get the resource off that token for that turn to then attack with your weapon. It's just how good is that, right? Because you're then paying 2 resources to attack with your weapon. Is how that works. But there is other ways to boost, and also you might just create a Hyperdriver and then not crank it as well. Like it could be the last. Like you could just attack for your turn with your 1 cost boost card, activate Maxx Nitro, and then set that Hyperdriver up for next turn. For instance.
I kind of glossed over the aspect of where you have to crank something. We have to swing with this first. When I just evaluated there, that does make it interesting. Yeah, I'm not.
So the Banksy weapon is super powerful, right? But you have to crank, right? So you're not just going to be swinging into this weapon every turn, because if you just pitched and once per turn action create this Hyperdriver, like you are paying 2 to swing your weapon, and if it like effective, that's just how it is, because you're paying 1 for the ability, and you're only getting 1 back off your Hyperdriver, off of your Maxx. So it's 3 resources. You're getting 1 back, effectively 2 to swing your weapon. And then the Hyperdriver is gone because you've used one of the counters for crank and then the other to get a resource that turn. So I think a lot of the time you will, depending on the deck and the game circumstance, like maybe you block out on a turn, you play your boost card for 1 resource, your other 2 resources, you Maxx Nitro to create the Hyperdriver, and then you set that up for the next 2 turns, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. On to Teklovossen. So Teklovossen is a mechanologist for intellect, 20 health. And the hero text says, you may play Evos from your banished zone. And once per turn instant, 3 resources. You may play your next Evo this turn as though it were an instant. When you do, draw a card. Important to note that it says once per turn instant once again. So just key to note. And then going over to Teklovossen's weapon. It is Teklo Leveler. Well, this isn't really Teklovossen's weapon. This is the generic mechanologist weapon. Teklo Leveler attacks for 2. And it says, if you have 1 or more Evos equipped, this gets once per turn action, 3 resources attack. 2 or more, this costs 2 less to activate. 3 or more, this gets go again. And 4 or more, this gets +1 attack. Hey, I want to get your thoughts on Teklovossen here.
I think Evos are the most interesting cards in the set, and their way they're going to interact in them is, I think, they're the hardest to evaluate because I think they have value outside of Teklovossen, 100%, and a lot of them have some really good value outside of Teklovossen. But then, Teklovossen's ability to effectively play any at instant speed and get effects on them that can impact the board. Like, this is the hero that's like the kind of the tricky hero, right? This is the one that's going to have combat tricks because of the ability. This is the one that's going to be able to do things at instant speed to mess up your opponent's kind of math and the way they're trying to plan out turns. I think the way I kind of look at it is like, this once per turn, you pay the 3 resources, but you get the card back, right? So if your deck is full of like a lot of blues and Evos, you're going to get some value off this. But also, you only have 4 Evo spots, right? So again, it's like the item thing with Dash. At least your Evos block for 2 and 3, whereas your items don't. But with Teklovossen, it's like, okay, how many and which ones do I want? And actually, the hardest thing is probably going to be prioritizing which ones you want in draft rather than necessarily the ones you want to play. You'll just play a lot of them, but like which ones do you want in terms of what's your game plan? I think Teklovossen seems like he has the kind of like the most range in his game plans. Is my kind of take.
What do you think about the concept of playing Evos out of your banish zone? And if you do boost a Evo into your banish zone, you effectively kind of draw that card potentially, which seems very powerful.
It's really powerful. So it kind of makes me think, does Teklovossen just play a bunch of Evos because either you just block with them or you boosted them, and then you've got that flexibility, right? It's like, how many boost cards do I play, and how often am I boosting? Like how often, like he could play really revolve around that kind of that first line. You can play Evos from banish zone,
and you can scrap them from your graveyard to your banish zone.
Scrap them.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can use the scrap mechanics. So I think Teklovossen just has kind of the widest range, and starts at 20 health. But, has the least immediate impact off of his ability. Maxx Nitro, for instance, that I think we talked about how straightforward that sort of game plan kind of looks on the surface of, netting resources or set up turns and having a really powerful weapon that immediately impacts like Banksy. Whereas on Teklovossen's side, you can only play Teklo Leveler, and this weapon does literally nothing to start with unless you have an Evo.
That's a great point, because I think that if we just took the heroes and we put them side by side, Teklovossen for me would be the clear winner, at least in terms of value, because you are effectively getting card advantage, and that's very, very powerful usually in Flesh and Blood. And I think that is reflected in design, because Teklovossen's weapon is by far the worst. So
it's important to note that the other two heroes can play Teklo level. Like I think that's going to happen very rarely, but there was probably times where you're just like, okay, I've drafted this deck, and there's probably archetypes out there that are going to exist because Evos are really strong. Where it's like Teklo level is the weapon I should be playing here. Yeah,
I wonder how much Teklovossen is hinged on you having access to Evos in order to turn your weapon, because I don't think that a Teklovossen deck necessarily needs Evos to function. I don't think you need to be getting tons and tons of value of Teklovossen's ability. That's what I mean. But maybe it's necessary to have those Evos and equip them, because if you're a weaponless hero, that's like a very, very bad thing. So that's the most interesting dynamic for me with Teklovossen. Like, do you actually need a critical minimum, a certain number of Evos in order to get the deck to function, because of specifically how it interacts with the weapon? Because Teklovossen, assuming, if you were just using Teklovossen, maybe you get one instance of value out of it, just effectively draw that additional card, and that was enough, starting at 20 life. It probably wouldn't be good enough with this weapon. So that's why this one's a tough cookie for me to crack. But honestly, if I was looking at a hero to pick initially off the bat, first time interacting with the format, for me, I'd be looking at Teklovossen. Actually, not Maxx Nitro.
Yeah, I think me too. I think this is the hero that I get just has the widest range. So I just think and there's so many Evos in here, and it only takes a couple, there's so many different ways you could build it. You could block out and kind of control the game until you get to the Evos that you want, or you could just spam out Evos, and, I think there's a few different ways it could go. Obviously, I think one thing that's important to note is, like, if you put a Blade Break Evo on there, like when the Evo is destroyed, like all the sub items under are destroyed as well. So if you have a Blade Break arms, let's say, and then you block with that, then you've lost your arm spot, right? So
yeah, it's interesting with the anti-synergy with some of the cards that prevent you from blocking with equipment, where it's like you are already incentivized to not block with equipment. Like, we'll get into it, but I think some of these cards actually going to change the paradigm of how Flesh and Blood players tend to block with their equipment in a game of Limited, because it tends to be saved for at least later in the game, or very, very critical on-hit triggers, but there are going to be cards in the set that don't allow you to get value out of that potentially in the late game, that will be sort of saved for the second cycle, or just, for the later part of the game.
Yeah, but because of the temper and the battle worn equipment, or the battle worn mostly, Teklovossen can have, access to like 10 to 12 defense.
Yeah.
So it's like I think you need these cards in that set to make sure you can push through.
Yeah, I think flexibility is a good word for him. It really does. It really is flexible.
We should get into the cards. And we're going to start with the equipment, right, Brendan?
Mm-hmm. Yep, starting with the cog workspace heads. I mean, I don't know if you need to talk about any of the tokens in terms of the proto
No, we've
bases.
gone through them.
Yeah, so
they're just a piece of equipment that says Mechanologist equipment, base head or base chest or whatever, and that's all they do.
Yep. So starting off with cog workspace head, this is a Mechanologist equipment base head at common. And it says, when this is equipped, put a steam counter on it. And it says, once per turn instance, one resource, remove a steam counter from this, shuffle a Mechanologist attack action card from your banished zone into your deck. Activate this ability only if you've boosted this turn. Hayden.
So you get access to the base already, right?
Mm-hmm.
The proto bases. So I think you really want the ability you to get off of these cogworks. So these are the cycle of this, which we'll go through, to get the value off of it, right? Mm-hmm. And so this one's going to allow you to get, maybe your best card that got boosted accidentally to put it back into your deck. Maybe it's an in-game finisher or something, for instance. Maybe it's again, it's an attack action, right? So it can't be an Evo or something like that. So it needs to be kind of like maybe just your best attack. That costs you one resource, but you don't lose the equipment, then you can Evo it later on or something. But you start with like the base Evo. So this card is like super low priority to me. I think like this is like a D plus range. Like equipment's hard to be low, I think, but because you start with an alternative that's not much worse than this, I think this gets a pretty low grade for me.
I 100% agree with you. I think that, comparing to some of what the other slots do, it's the weakest one. This idea of like you put the best card back in your deck, we've seen it so many times. You even mentioned it earlier, Memorial Ground, right? Everybody's like, play Memorial Ground. Oh, this is not as bad as Memorial Ground because Memorial Ground, you're discarding a card and able to do it. This one, you discard a resource effectively. But those effects are never as powerful as they immediately seem to be. When you think about like, oh my god, I just get my biggest bomb back in my deck. It just tends to not be how things go in Fleshable Limited.
It's also not from your graveyard like some of the other ones were. Yeah. So it's like you don't get to play your best card twice.
Yeah, you have to boost it. Even worse.
Or scrap. You can scrap it. Well, you can't because it's on the item or equipment. So yeah,
D for me.
Attack action.
D for me.
All right, next up. So Cogwick base chest. It's a Mechanologist equipment base chest again, and it says. Again, same thing. All of these are going to say the same thing in terms of when this is equipped. Put a steam counter. Once per turn instant on this one. One resource. Remove a steam counter from this game. 2 resources. Activate this ability only if you boosted this turn.
I think this is good. I think this is a good card. So this is effectively gain a resource. So it's like kind of like a tunic.
Yeah.
I guess at that because you have to pay the initial. I think that this card is probably a B. I would want this in most of my cards. I think that it would perform very, very well.
So I'm just going to go back to the fact that with these base equipment, right? Like because the base equipment you start with literally do nothing. It just enables you to play Evos, right? So let's just take that away because everyone's on the same equal footing, right? So anytime you draft these, you just want to look at just the effect, right? Yep. And so I compare this to something like Threadbare Tunic from Outsiders. But this one has a little bit more. I mean, it has a restraint on it as well, like Threadbare did, which is you needed to not have any cards in hand, right? Mm-hmm. But this one costs you a resource to first of all activate it, so it's a little bit more narrow, even though you have to have boosted this turn as well. I think for me, it's like a C plus. I think. I also just think there's a lot of alternatives at the chest slot, and you also because you might Evo quickly as well. I mean, not that it's gonna happen very often, but I think there is a circumstance where like you never get to use this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely like some Teklovossen decks for sure.
But it's good. It's good. Getting resources is good.
Yeah, tends to be a good. We see this this ability on a chest slot in Fleshable Limited happen a lot. Whether it's Threadbare Tunic, whether it's Blooddrop Arcade, like this is
Hardened Crosstrap.
Yes, happen. Yeah, I mean that one's a little less conditional.
Insane.
We see it all the time, and it's very good. It's just like you have to evaluate the condition. And then kind of go from there. But ultimately, getting a resource, very, very good. All right. Cogware Space Arms says once per turn instance, remove a steam counter from this. Your next Mechanologist attack this turn gets +1 attack. Activates ability only if you've boosted this turn. I think this one is it's so interesting because I guess to an extent you have to consider on-hit effects and threat of activation, which is we saw that in Uprising a bit with some of those items. It can be annoying to deal with. I think that this is a C to C minus, just a role player for me.
I'm just going to point out for people because this is going to get people on pre-release. This says your next Mechanologist attack.
It does. If you activate and it's an instant. Oh, this is the they do people this dirty is going to get people. Oh my god.
Yeah. So just bear in mind that when you activate this, if you already have an attack on the combat chain, it will not impact that attack. It will impact your next attack that you play. So, but it is an attack action, so it can. This is really good with Banksy, for instance, to push a breakpoint. But I think for me, this is like a C minus because it isn't a combat trick. It's very face up, and you have to have boosted to activate it, and it costs a resource. But yeah,
all right. And
then Cogwick Base Legs is the last one. Again, when equipped, put a steam counter on it. It's once per turn instant. one resource. Remove a steam counter from this. Gain one action point. Activate this ability only if you've boosted this turn. I think this is the best one, I think, because I don't know, like the resource and chest is really important, but I think, I think of something like dash, for instance, where you could attack twice with the weapon. I think there's some, playing items is really hard, but if you have an extra action point, it makes it a lot easier because it's really hard. You can't play an item and attack with your weapon in the same turn, basically, because late game you can with Teklovossen because you have the go again, or mid to late game. But for Dash and Maxx, it's really hard. And I think this ability to pay one resource to effectively like put an item into play and still have your action to play like your big attack that doesn't have boost, for instance, is really good. So I like this one a lot. I think it's kind of unique to get the action point as well. I don't think there's a lot of ways to get extra action points to play your items out if you aren't dash and playing stuff off the top of your deck. So I think for me this is actually like a B minus. I think this is better than the chest.
Yeah, I think you sold me. I think that there's more use cases for this than might immediately appear when you first evaluate it. And I think we talked about, with the items, with potentially attacking with the weapon multiple times, seems good. All right, on to Teklo base head. I think we can do you want to evaluate these all together or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so these are all mechanologist equipment bases. They all have blade break, and so they're effectively, they have one defense. You have base head, chest, arms, legs. So when evaluating these cards, I think the main thing to consider is just what are they competing with. The ones that compete with less powerful alternatives are better, or the ones that are competing with more powerful alternatives. So we talk about like the action point or the additional resource. Those are the ones you potentially want to be using. Is when the ones that are competing with the least powerful alternative. Your thoughts, Hayden?
I think these, like the only reason you want to ever block with these is if you're not going to play an Evo, right? Because they blade break, they're gone. So the decks that either aren't focused on Evos at all or don't only have them in maybe a couple slots for particular reasons. So something like, I'm thinking like Maxx Nitro, right? Like Evos, I think they're still good, honestly, in all the decks. But you might have one or two in particular that you're wanting to get on the board and the rest are kind of whatever, right? In that case, it's like maybe there's a head and a chest that you've got Evo, and it's like, well, I'll pick up this kind of blade break legs because blade break is really good. Like I get an upgrade on my starting equipment, which effectively does nothing if I have no Evo, and I've got this iron rot legs. And so I look at this as iron rot legs, but worse, or iron rot whatever, but worse, because a lot of the time your deck strategy is going to be make sure that you do not want to block with these. So in some decks, these are going to be literally your starting equipment because you're not going to use them for blade break. So that's really bad, right? Like if I'm Teklovossen, for instance, and I've, got all my Evos, like I'm not blocking with this. So it's effectively, I might as well just play the proto base equipment, right? Yeah. In a lot of circumstances. So I think you've got to look at it from that way. And I think for that regard, I think it's hard for these to be any better than like a C.
All right, next up is Evo Command Center. This is a mechanologist action equipment Evo head. It is a yellow pitch, cost 3, is at rare, blocks for 3. It says, if you have a base head equipped, transform into this, then equip this. It says, once per turn instance, destroy a card under this. Your next weapon attack this turn gains, when this hits, draw a card, and it has blade break. First thing I want to note before I pass over to you, Hayden, is when I initially read this, it's important to take note of your next weapon attack, even though this is at instant this turn. Yeah, so another tricky template.
Yeah. Good thing to know. These, I think this is obviously the first of the Evos we're going to talk about. All of them are very interesting, and I think all of them are at least pretty good. I think the first thing I want to talk about, we can just kind of spend the most time as we start talking about Evos, and this applies to all Evos, but you're going to pay your 3 resources to put this Evo into play. So you're paying 2 cards to upgrade your piece of equipment into a blade break 3, right? So you're effectively trading down a card if you look at it that way, but it puts a permanent onto the board that allows you to block for 3 at some point. But let's just say, okay, opportunity cost is that my opponent attacked for 6, I didn't block, and then I use this plus a blue to upgrade my equipment. Like you could say, well, I've lost 3 life in that instance. Now that's very simplistic. Sometimes, you're going to have extra cards. This is going to be easy to play, for instance. Sometimes you're just going to block with this, right? But just want to point that out. So then the once per turn instant, destroy a card under this. So this could be the proto base, but also there's other Evo bases, which we'll get to. So you could potentially have two effects on this, or 2 triggers on this. You get to threaten that your weapon draws a card, which could be powerful as well. But again, that's probably just incentivizing them to make sure they definitely block with a card. So I think when I look at this at a yellow that might potentially trade me down a card, I actually think this is one of the weaker Evos, but it does block 3. And I think the flexibility of being able to block 3 plus being a yellow means that it's still at least reasonable. I think the Evos are quite hard to evaluate, I think.
How important is it to be playing this out of Banish on something like Teklovossen and not be, effectively going down the additional card? Is that going to be significantly better for Evo, like evaluating an Evo rather than playing it in, another hero?
Well, yeah, I mean, at that point, right now, instead of trading down your card, you've traded your card across, right?
Yeah,
you've
across.
Pitched your blue from hand. You've played this from Banish, so you've traded a 1 card for 1 card, right? But then that's super powerful because now you've got this Blade Break 3 in play, which might even trade up on your item that didn't block that you pitched.
True.
And also might allow you to block out overpower cards late that your opponent's trying to put. Like, I think Evos are going to be important because of overpower as well. I think overpower is there's a lot of overpower in this format. So, if the games are going to go sort of like medium and to long and you do want to defend, then you are going to need some number of Evos, I think. And one that has a Blade Break 3 is pretty important. I think this is maybe the worst of the cycle. The heads look sometimes like they're going to be the worst of the cycle. So I guess all things said, like trying to evaluate this card, I have this around like the kind of C range at the moment. I think this is some of the worst of the Evos, I guess, but it is yellow and blocks 3 naturally, so that flexibility is pretty reasonable. So maybe I'm going to give like a C+.
Yeah, I'd C for it.
Cool, I'll move on. Evo engine room. So we won't read the first line of text on all these Evos because they all say the same thing, which is if you have a base X equipped, transform it into this. So all the Evos say that. So this is again a 3 cost, 3 defense, mechanologist action, equipment Evo chest. It's once per turn instant. Destroy a card under this. Your next weapon attack this turn costs 1 less to activate and has blade break. So same as the above, but a different effect. Again, resource effect. We like resource effects. I think this is definitely better from an effect standpoint than the head, but all the things that I just said still apply to the engine room. But with that said, I would give this like a C+, maybe B- in the right deck. Like, I think all of the Evos get like a half a grade to a grade better in Teklovossen.
Yeah.
So
I give it a B-, specifically because you could have the repeatable effect of maybe activating this twice, and effectively getting 5 value out of this card. So if you do, I mean, the thing is it's like if you play it out of Banish Zone, it's like, yeah, then it's nuts. So B- for me. Next up is the Evo Smoothbore. Smooth brain.
Same thing, right?
Yeah. Same thing. But it says once per turn instant, destroy a card under this. Your next weapon attack this turn gets +1. So next weapon attack and your next at instant. So again, the tricky templating. Man, it's going to get so many people on preview this weekend. I have this at a C. I just don't think it's good. It's maybe even worse than that. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a C. Again, in Teklovossen, I think a lot of these are going to be more like a B. But I'm going to evaluate cards always from the standpoint of early picks and where this card kind of sits relative to the other cards, right? But we'll talk about kind of, side grades and stuff as we need to. Evo Thruster. This is the legs of this cycle, and it says once per turn instant, destroy a card under this, you may attack an additional time with target weapon this turn. I like this one. I think this one is like the most interesting to me. I think the leg slot honestly is like the most interesting to me because I think it allows potential for the most kind of interesting plays. Like, for instance, if I have this in Teklovossen with 4, like 3 to 4 Evos deep, like this is really powerful. But even potentially, like this is maybe the one Evo I'm focused on in my Maxx Nitro deck, being able to attack twice with my Banksy in a turn is really, really strong, right? Like as a 3 attack that has an on-hit effect. So I think I have this one like a B-.
I had it at a B. Yeah, I had it at a B. It just seems, what's funny is that it's the one where it doesn't have the most immediate sort of quantitative value on the card, but when you just think about it in the context of what you probably are going to be doing with this in the format, like that is a very powerful thing to do, attacking with the weapon multiple times. Anyway,
yeah, context is so important with these Evos. Honestly, like they are hard to evaluate, and each deck is going to value them differently. But I think in the context of the set overall, I'm going to try and evaluate them next to the cards that you're going to be competing to draft them with, and I think that sits at around like a B- for me.
And Hayden, because I love your beautiful voice so much, I'm going to let you read off all these Evo Teklo scopes.
All right, so next up we have a blue cycle of mechanologist action equipments Evos. They are called Evo X, and these are from the round the table. These are reprints. So the text on these is completely irrelevant and limited. They all reference Teklo Blaster, which we don't have access to in this draft set. So they're effectively a blue Mechanologist action equipment, 1 at head, arms, legs, chest, etc. They cost 3, they defend for 2, and they have battle worn 1. So they're basically blue equipments. They're going to get you 3 defense, 2 the first time, 1 the second, and then blow themselves up. I mean, I think these are all kind of like just in the C range then for that regard. I mean, blue Evos these are cards I actively want in Teklovossen because I want blues in my deck and I want a good number of Evos in my Teklovossen deck. So I think these are around like a B range if I'm in Teklovossen, but otherwise these are like C's. I do think blue Evos are good though, because sometimes they're just going to be like really easy for you to play and be good value.
Yeah, agree there. All right, on to the red cycle of equipment here, these Evo base. So if Evo base Sentry Head costs 2, pitches for red, blocks for 2. Again, the same text as usual, has battle worn. That's about it. So battle worn 2. That's what this is. Hayden, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so these ones don't have ability text on them, right? They don't have an activated or a static ability like the others do, but these are base equipment as well. So while you can't start them in play, when you play these on top of your already like your proto equipment or your cogwork or whatever, you then can also play another Evo on top of this, which is really, then you've got 2 cards under for your top level ability. And these are really interesting, I think, for Teklovossen in particular. And even if you just played these, I don't know, like say, because they cost 2, let's just say I'm Dash, for instance, pay 1, play my boost attack, and then pay 2 for my last 2 resources, my blue, and use this to upgrade my base equipment. I'm getting effective, like some pretty good return on my resources for 3 defense over 2 blocks on Battle Worn, and then the ability to potentially upgrade it. But the downside is like these are red, so you're not going to be wanting to pitch these. You're going to either want to block or play them when you draw them, and they do just defend for 2 if you defend with them from hand. So I think with like all that said, like if I'm looking at the slots overall, like if I'm looking at these, I think I give these like a C to C+, I think.
Interesting.
Like you don't want these cards if you're. I don't think you particularly want these cards if you're in Maxx Nitro or Dash, for instance.
I don't think so.
A lot of the
I
time.
feel like they're kind of doo-doo there. And in Teklovossen, are they good enough? It's like I feel like I really don't want to be playing these cards from hand. That's just the one thing.
Yes, and then they block 2, and
yes.
then. But these are the kind of things that you could block with early, and then scrap and get some good value out of, right? So
scrap mechanic it changes the dynamic of how you evaluate these cards. That's what's hard. But I think these are role players in Teklovossen, and then they're bad in other decks potentially. That's sort of my evaluation.
I mean, if you're in Dash, a lot of the time, like I said before, I had to give you an example of where they could be useful. But are you wanting to trade your 2 resources that you could have used elsewhere to usually play an item off the top of your deck, right? And your action point and a card. Like that's the other thing. Outside of Teklovossen playing this instant speed, this costs you action points, right? That's really important to remember those with Evos. That really brings down the power level of these to a degree. So yeah, like I think if you're already out of Teklovossen, like these start to become like Ds. Like these are not active cards I want to draft.
Really bad. All right, next up is Evo Datamine. This is not an Evo base. It is, Evo had 0 cost, yellow pitch, blocks for 2, says once per turn instance, destroy a card under this, draw a card, then put a card from your hand on top of your deck, and it has Blade Break. This is interesting. I don't think the effect is particularly powerful, being able to sort of dig to that top card. I wonder if this is okay in something like Dash Database, where you're able to take a item from your hand, then put it on top. I mean, that's kind of the immediate thing that jumps out to me. Other than that, these cost 0. So, playing this in Teklovossen, great, especially for Banasone. I think that's like 100% something I wanted to do. And that applies to the whole cycle. Like these are the Evos, like these look very, very premium to me in something like Teklovossen, where I don't have other, bigger payoffs because I do want to not be spending an additional card to play these on a turn.
I really like this in Dash that you already pointed it out, but the fact that this just cost me, yes, my action point, but just 1 card, like I'm not paying resources for this. And then I'm going to get the return on it because I've got the Blade Break equipment, which is going to help me with stop like on hits from my opponent, help with overpower turns. It's also yellow, so it does have like a little bit of flexibility, and it still defends for 2 from hand if you need to just block with it. But the fact that I can definitely set up effectively, if I flip an item off the top, it's saying draw a card. Yeah. Once per turn instant, draw, destroy the base equipment, draw a card. Like that is good. So I think this one is at its best in Dash. I think I have this like a C. I really like these 0 cost ones. I think they're powerful. I have this like a C plus B in dash, I think. But well, I guess I would probably overall give this like a C plus B minus. It's like a C in Maxx Nitro, but then it's like a B plus in dash and Teklovossen.
Okay, yeah. So you added Teklovossen there. I think this is really good in Teklovossen as well. Yeah, Teklovossen. I want to be paying 0 for my Evos. I think again, Evos.
You need some that cost 0 for sure.
Evos so hard to evaluate, but paying the difference between 0 and 1. I mean, in most card games, but Flesh and Blood in particular, huge because that is an entire card that you're sort of circumventing there.
I think these are going to be the most fought over equipment. The Evos, because I'll read the next one, which is Evo Battery Pack. So all the same, text again, 0 cost, Blade Break, Defense 2 is an Evo chest. It says once per turn, instant destroy a card under this, put a Steam counter on item you control with Crank. So this one in particular is going to be very good for Maxx and Dash, but also just in general. And then there's still the 0 cost Blade Break equipment. So let's just look at this. If you get 1 counter of value out of this plus your 2 Blade Break, like that counter could be worth a card almost, honestly. Like there's a lot of, maybe if it's just 1 resource on something like a hyperdriver, it's like, yeah, it's fine. But there are some really powerful equipment where if you can add an extra counter onto the Crank equipment, you're going to get some really good value out of it, which we'll get into soon. So I think honestly, this one for me is like, this is one of the best. I think it's like a B plus maybe. Okay,
interesting. B plus. I had C plus there, but yeah, it's funny seeing these at common because I feel like I want these more than the rares. It's not even close. All right, next one is Ego Cogspitter. It's the arm slot of this cycle, and it says once per turn, instant destroy a card into this, put an item with cost 0/1 from your hand onto the arena. Yeah, that effect is good in Dash for sure, and it might be good in some of the other heroes as well if you have to put items in. I'm not sure how many items you're going to be playing something like Maxx Nitro or Teklovossen, but that is a good effect, especially at instant speed. I mean, we've seen this before with I can't draw an exact parallel, but you saw with Prism, OG Prism with the crown, being able to put something onto the battlefield and effectively cheat out that action point. Like, it is very powerful. I mean, this is one of the ones where if I'm in Dash database, this is probably like a pack one, pick one kind of equipment for me, to be honest.
So you're forcing it.
I don't know if I'm forcing it because I feel this is playable in Teklovossen. Yeah, exactly. I think
it's very good in Teklovossen.
Yeah,
I think it's good in Maxx as well. Like, this is how you get some good value out of it, because this isn't a stat. This is a effect that stays on the board, right? Like, obviously, once you Blade Break, it's gone. But you can play this, and then you can wait a couple of turns. You find an item that has good value, and even in your Maxx deck, maybe it's one of the 3 items you play. You get into the battlefield because what we talked about earlier, like, it is hard. Like, these cost an action point to put these items into play, and they can ruin your turn. So, I do think this effect is pretty powerful, and then particularly in Dash, right? Like, this is a card you definitely want to have. Like, you want a full set of Evo equipment. Of the this yellow line of equipment. I think almost. And
I think if there's one item that sort of exists at a power level that's far above the rest that people tend to want in their decks, like, this sort of gives you permission to play that card. I feel like in something like Maxx Nitro, where you don't have to give up the action point, or you don't have to perfectly sequence it so it comes out at the end of your turn. I don't know.
Because it's hard to evaluate because the card, these cost an action.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, you're going to get the Blade Break 2 off of it, but also I need more value than that. And if my value is that I then get to, like, because in a single turn, you could go 2-card hand as Dash. Like, literally, maybe you block the 2 cards, get passed back, and you're like, okay, play this with my action point, immediately activate the once per turn instant and play the item from my hand.
Yep. For me, this is the best card we've seen so far, I think. I like this more than the others, actually. In everybody.
I can't remember. I'd have to scroll back up to think this is the best card I've seen so far. It's definitely up there.
This is my favorite. I think that this gives you permission to play. If there is an item that exists, we'll get into the items, of course, later. But if there is an item that exists that is very, very powerful, like, you now are able to play that in some of the other decks. And I think that, like we talked about Teklovossen, just 0 cost Evo is very, very good. But Dash database, the synergy is obvious. But I think if there is a 0 cost item that you want to be playing in Maxx, then maybe the one that deals 4 damage when something hits, or something like that. We'll get into it. This card is very, very good. I like this.
Yeah,
card
the fact it's once per turn instant, right? Like you say, you can cheat in something like the grenade, right? Which is huge. So yeah. I think you're right. I think this is like a B plus maybe. Like, this is probably the best of the cycle. You might be right.
Yeah.
The more I think about it.
So funny. I had a C plus, but I just talked myself out of it immediately.
I had most of these at a B. So at Evo Charging Rods, so this is the Evo Legs. It's the same thing. This is once per turn instant, destroy a card under this, create a quicken token. I mean, I really like that, right? Like, obviously, again, costs you an action point to put this into play, but so often you're going to be able to just play this at the end of the cycle. But then also the on-demand to set up a quicken token for a potential really big turn. I like this card, but I think it's less flexible than the card we just talked about, and probably has a slightly lower ceiling than Cogspitter. So I have this sort of like a B though.
Okay, yeah, I'd B minus. Like I said, my previous rating was I disagree with it, but B minus for me on this one. Good card.
Could see that.
All right, Hayden, take us into Evo Zoom Call.
Okay, the worst name in the set. I'm calling it right now. I don't want any reminders of Zoom calls in my life. Okay, this is the next cycle of Mechanologist equipment. This is a Mechanologist instant equipment, though. So you can play this next cycle at instant speed, and they are not bases, they are just Evos. So we're looking at the Evo here to start with. It is Evo Zoom Call. It costs 0, defends for 0 as well. And it says if you have a base head equipped, transform it, obviously. These are all going to say this. And then the text on this one is, when this is equipped, you may banish a card from your hand. If you do, draw a card. So instant speed ability to put an Evo into play, which can be relevant for cards that have Evo upgrade text, right? And cards that have any other interaction with the Evos potentially. Good way to save some of your equipment. For instance, maybe you just blocked with that 2 defense red head, and then you play this instant speed so that you don't lose it before the combat chain closes.
You can do that.
You can do that. But my takeaway on this whole cycle is that I think unless you have the build around for these, like I think these are build arounds like maybe C plus B minus, but otherwise these are like in the D pluses range for me.
Interesting.
Like
I wonder if I was wondering if they're good enough with Teklovossen. Oh, it's not Teklovossen, but the generic weapon, right? Because, but you likely be playing Teklovossen just because like that thing is so powerful if you get 3 or more Evos out. And this is like
0.
Yes.
And doesn't cost an action point.
Yes. Yeah. I think that like, it's just so hard to evaluate. God damn it. This is the thing about Flesh and Blood. They just like to flip the entire script of the game on us. But I think in Teklovossen that these cards are actually pretty good. Because they allow you to sort of ramp up your weapon pretty fast and without suffering action points. And because like you don't want to be ramping up your weapon with like massive tempo loss like 4 times in a game, right? That would be bad. Yeah. And you're avoiding that with this potentially, but it comes at the opportunity cost of this being, this card is not great in a vacuum.
Doesn't defend, is only yellow. Like if this is a blue,
yeah,
I feel very differently about these cards. But yeah, I think this one is one of the worst, to be honest. Like the filter effect is one of the worst. Although, again, Teklovossen, you can banish another Evo to play later on, so there is value. So all of these have like some build around grades of like C plus and upwards. But I think this one is like I'm not excited about taking this one early in draft, for instance. Like it's not particularly what I want, unless I think that archetype is really powerful. So that's why I have it around like a D plus C minus range. Right. But then we can go on to like the next one, which is Evo Buzzhive, which is the same thing again, Mechanologist instant equipment, but at the chest slot, and it says when it's equipped, gain a resource. Like you get immediate return from this, and I think a resource is much better than filter, for instance.
I mean, that card seems busted. I mean, it seems like a lot of things I want to be doing except for the block 0, but that's fine. I mean, especially something like Teklovossen. I mean, this card seems crazy.
I like this one a lot. I mean, I still think no block is a real cost, and this still costs you a card. Like you are effectively going, I'm pitching this for red almost, but I get the Evo upgrade effect. So if I don't have any Evo upgrade,
it's bad.
Reasons to play this, then it's not good, right? Like any combat tricks or whatever it is. But I think still I would just base put this in the C plus range. But again, build around wise. If this is in the right deck, it's like it's like a B plus.
Mm-hmm. All right.
I do. Sorry, another thing I want to point out is if you play this in Teklovossen, right? That's that slot done. Right. So you are like, there's no, if you played all 4 of these in Teklovossen, your equipment becomes pretty bad. And yes, you power up your weapon really quickly, but then your equipment is done, right? Or your other Evos are dead. You can't play them on top of this. So there's always a cost to playing these cards.
Yeah. So you can activate, can you activate the other Evos and then play? You can't play them in response to like the activation of the bases, right? If you're cashing in the base for like the resource or the action point, you could.
No, it's an item under. It's no longer a card. It's just a thing underneath.
So with the blocking that works. All right, onto Whiz Bang. Yeah, all you Hayden.
So this is when this is equipped up to 1 target attack, it's +1. So this is an actual combat trick. Yeah. Unlike the other ones we've seen, because this immediately can target an attack. So, right. I mean, this is good combat trick, but again, it comes at a cost. So I think there's a ceiling on this, but I think this one is around like the C plus range.
Well, 1 resource is definitely better than 1 attack. And this is
maybe.
this is a pretty well, just in general. Like if you think about like the value of cards, like one resource is definitely more valuable than a single attack. But yeah, it depends on hit effects, and I think this is it's very weak. It's a very weak combat trick, but it's a very modular combat trick at that. Because I think I'm thinking about something like lunging press. It's like I don't know, hard to evaluate.
Well, this kind of reminds me a little bit of lunging press. Like I actually think this is
like lunging press, but it's the payoff.
And
there,
a deck that
and
a deck that doesn't care about evos, this is better than Buzz Hive, because in a deck that doesn't care about evos, just pitch it instead of equipping it, right? Whereas this, you can actually get a combat trick out of or pitch it. So, you know, I think it's a little bit better, but worse in the decks that want these effects. And then Zipline is the last one, which is the legs. This says when this is equipped, up to one target attack gets go again. Again, you can use this as a combat trick, and I think this is a better combat trick. Like an action point, I think is worth more than 1 damage all the time. But I'd probably put this around like the C plus in the right deck, B range, B plus range.
Agreed. All right.
Let's try and unfry our brains a little bit and talk about some of the.
Yeah, this is like, hey, here's this entirely new mechanic that interacts with every hero in a vastly different way. It's like evaluated. Okay. All right.
Can we just quickly wrap it up though? Evos are really good. They're going to be really important in draft, and most decks are going to want some number of them. It's really going to be about which ones you want for the archetype you're going after. I think they're going to dictate a lot of archetypes, and Teklovossen is going to just naturally get the most value out of the Evos, no matter what they are. The others are going to be really contextual on the hero that you're drafting. Some of them are better in, like for instance, what was like the Cog Spitter line, the yellow line that's at action speed, like that. I think deserves to be in like the B range flat, because that is good in every deck, whereas some of them are going to be a lot more contextual. So I think just to wrap up our kind of, takeaways on Evos.
Interesting, the dynamic of how many cards you're committing to Evos and equipment slot versus like attack action cards in your deck and things like that. Like, okay, that's for a later discussion. Anyway, on to heavy artillery. Mechanologist attack action. It's at rare. We're looking at the red one. Attack for 6, blocks for 3, costs 3. Says Evo upgrade. The defending hero can't defend with attack action cards with cost less than X, where X is the number of Evos you have equipped. Yeah, so when evaluating this card, you kind of need to know like how frequent are non-attack action cards, etc. Like how attack action heavy is the set? Like, is the evasion of this card going to be relevant? I think as an end game threat, this is pretty reasonable. That being said, there's cards with like overpower, which is less conditional than this, I assume. I think this card is statted fine. It's fine. 2 card 6 with evasion that blocks for 3. I like it. I think it's above a role player for me, maybe like a C plus. Yeah. With when you add in the endgame win condition, it's like, does it bump it up to like a B minus is a question, but I think it's a C plus for me.
If this isn't the right deck, like in a Teklovossen deck or a deck that has built, maybe it's, I think there is like a kind of, maybe there's like a dash leveler deck here where you play leveler and dash and you just spam the like 0 cost Evos, right? Like the instant ones to immediately like pump it up or something. And maybe you've got a lot of good items to support that, for instance, so you decide to play dash instead of Teklovossen. Then something like this, right, is a potential 6 attack that's unblockable, because there's not a lot of non-attacks in this format, except for the pumps that block 2 and equipment. So I think there is like some upside, but there is ways to sort of defend it even with the 4 Evos, and it doesn't get past 6 attack. So I think I have this at like a C, but yeah, actually, I'm going to go with you C plus.
Yeah,
I think it's right, C plus. It could be like a B minus in some decks.
If it was textless, I think it'd be like it'd be more of a role player. Like just red 2 card 6 block 3 is like it's like fine, right? So when you add this evasive aspect to it, it's like I think it's a C plus. All right.
Liquid Cooled Mayhem is our next card. This is a Mechanologist action attack. Also has a cycle. It costs 4. And we're looking at the red, so it attacks for 6 and defends for 3. And it says Evo upgrade. This costs 1 less to play for each Evo you've equipped. So this could potentially be a 0 for 6, Brendan. What's the likelihood of this? I think a lot of the time this is going to cost 2 and 3.
So, yeah, the thing about 2 and 3 is that it's interesting and limited. It's like, is 2 and 3, are they similar? Because it still becomes 2 card 6. Like it's just like, it really is 2 card 6. And you getting to where this actually breaks the paradigm of Flesh and Blood, which is 0 card 6. Very, very unlikely. I think that the floor of this is like absolute garbage as well. Like if you pay 4 for this card, oh my God, it's so bad, right? Like it's so bad. So I would put this at a C-, I think, maybe even a D+. I don't want to play this card. It's just the card's I feel like this card's like going to be a liability a lot of the time. There's a build around grade for sure, but if you're not putting down Evo, the card's a massive liability. You can't do 3 card 6. That's too bad.
I agree, but you could. So even if this cost you 4, which I agree that is terrible, and that's like in a D range, right? But if this did cost you 4, then you're looking at hands where you play 3 cards basically, or 4 cards. Which is still not good. But as soon as this costs 3, it's in the C range, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as this costs 1, it's in like the B+, like the B+ range.
Yep.
And it does block 3. So I think this is like a C for me. And I think this is one where it's like, I'm not going to take this early. But as soon as I know that, like because we want Evos in basically every deck, right? Like is what we're saying. Yeah. We think anyway. Then I think this is going to be a 3 for 6 all the time, which is just fine. And if you feel like you're going to be able to get the upside of this, then the upside is not amazingly high, but 1 or 0 cost is pretty good. Yeah. So it does start to become pretty appealing.
I think I graded it too harshly because it blocks for 3, which sort of stops it from being a massive liability.
I really like the blue, by the way. So the red might be the worst, but I think actually the blue might be the best. Like a potential 0 cost 4, or it's just a blue that blocks 3 is really good. So
yeah, and the thing about the blue is you'll be pitching it for the late game, which is when you're more likely to have Evos. Okay, yeah. So the blue.
I think red might be the worst of the range, to be honest, and like the blue might be in like the C+ range, maybe even B- in the right deck.
All right, next up is Mechanical Strength. This is a Mechanologist attack action at rare, attacks for 5, blocks for 3, costs 3 again. So it's Evo upgrade. This gets plus X attack, where X is the number of Evos you have equipped. I have this at a C. I think this is a role player at best, right? We're looking at 2 card 6 when you have 1 Evo, 2 card 5, even worse. But I guess it's not unreasonable to see the ceiling of this. I just think this card is not fantastic. It's fine. I'll put it in my deck.
So again, this is a cycle. And I think a lot of these cycles, the blues look quite enticing, I think, because they're like blues that have the really good late game upside. At blue, you're going to be able to attack this for a 6, right? Potentially in like the right Teklovossen deck in the end game. It's like a 1 card 7, because it'll get plus 4. That'd be super appealing. Sorry, 2 card 7. But I think this is like in the C. Well, I actually think if you're playing this in a deck where you don't have Evos, it's like in the D range, but we think most decks are probably going to play 1 Evo. So that puts it like automatically into the C range, I think, 2 card 6. But there's potential for this to be like an A. Like if this is attacking for 9, if this is a 2 card 9, think Endless Maw kind of territory from Monarch. This is like an A, I think. And I think the blue is also very good, even in decks that have less Evos.
I'm totally with you on these cycle of cards where it's like, you look at the red and you see this like, oh my God, 2 card, like, I just don't know. In limited, like, are you going to, like, is that situation going to materialize? What's much more likely to materialize is you pitch it as a blue that blocks for 3, which is fine. And then it's freaking ridiculous value in the late game when you actually have those Evos equipped, if your deck is built for that. So I'm also on the blue train here.
But also, like, if you have, you can't fill your deck with too many of these. Like, it's going to be, but deck composition and balance can be really important in this format. You can't have too many items. You don't want too many Evos. You don't want too many of this because they don't have go again. And then also it's like if you play this early, it's a 2 card 5, which is terrible, right? But if this is a 2 card 7 or a 2 card 8, you start to get great value. So it's all so contextual. But I do think that this card has like a really high ceiling. It's not that hard to get there. It's going to be great in the right deck. So it's like, I think overall I have this at like, honestly, I think this more sits like a B- for me, C+, B-.
Interesting. Okay.
Let's move on to the items now. We're looking at blue items next. This is going to be a fuel injector. This is a 0 cost mechanologist action item at rare. It says instant. Put this at the bottom of its owner's deck. Gain a resource. These are not cycles. So just a blue one.
It's an interesting one. So it takes your action point if you play it. And if you play it via dash, you effectively get 0 resource. It's a no block card. It is blue, so it can be pitched. That's so funny. I have my notes here. How the hell do I evaluate this in limited? That's what it says this. I thought it was a C minus.
Yeah, I have this at a C. It's a resource card that can gain a resource. It has first turn equity. Going first in this format is really good, by the way, because of the items, right? You get first turn equity, but then also boost kind of derails that a little bit because you can get second turn equity as well.
Yeah. I think second turn will actually be the best, to be honest. I think it will be.
Well,
we'll see.
Yeah. We'll see. But I think the fact that this is a resource card that has impact and dash is particularly good. But I think this is like a C.
Yep,
maybe C plus.
All right.
Next up is Medkit. This is a mechanologist action item at blue. It says action. Put this on the bottom of his owner's deck. Gain 2 resource. I hate this
gain 2 life.
It costs you 2 actions.
Gain 2 life.
It costs you 2 actions.
Okay. Yeah, you said gain 2. You said gain 2 resources. It's gain 2.
Oh, sorry, gain 2 life. Sorry, gain 2 life.
Yeah, I had. It's interesting. Contextually, like, is there something that happens with this card where it's not just absolute garbage? I don't think so. Because put this on the bottom of its owner's deck, so you're like, oh, I'm looping this and gaining life. Like, that's just not going to happen. That's not how the game works, and the card doesn't even work like that when you start to think about how the end game scenario actually plays out. I think this card is bad, but I'm pretty hard on gain life effects, and I have been wrong in the past. Healing Balm.
How often do your gain life cost you 2 action points, though?
Never.
Yeah, exactly. I have this as a D.
Yeah, I could agree with that. All right, on to Steam Canister. Again, mechanologist item, blue pitch, 0 cost, says instant. Put this on the bottom of its owner's deck. Put a Steam counter on an item you control with Crank. So immediately thinking about this as gain a resource by putting it on a hybrid driver, but that's contextual gain a resource, it going back on the bottom of your deck. How good is it to put items on the bottom of your deck because they're no block cards? That's my question.
I don't want these on the bottom of my deck. I want these in my graveyard for like scrap effects and not to draw no blocks later in the game, to be honest.
That's so funny. Do you think this is actually an inherent downside they designed so that you can't scrap them? Because a lot of people would see that as an upside, like, oh, don't fatigue. But you literally are fatiguing with this because you have no block cards.
Yeah, because they don't block. Yeah. I think maybe Medkit you could argue because you can gain life, but it costs you. Yeah, I think this is a downside that he's going on the bottom of your deck, to be honest.
Yeah.
But sometimes it'll be an upside. You know, you can crack it when you've just pitched like your best red to make sure you get to play that red, for instance, off a 2-card hand, whatever. But I think this is the most exciting, though, because of the Crank keyword. And I think you can get more than 1 resource, more than 2 life of value out of a Crank counter, Steam counter on a Crank equipment. So I have this in like, I still think this is in like the D to C range in a lot of decks, but like I have this as like a, you know, build around synergistic, like C plus B minus. Honestly, I think this card could be really good.
I have C minus, but simply because I don't see the immediate build around. So I'll defer to you there.
We'll see. There's a lot of these cards are saying build around. You can only do so much building around, right? Like, and then we've got to be realistic about like just what's the average value of a card.
Exactly, and we got to be realistic about like no block items in a deck where you're just getting pounded by Maxx Nitro, and it's like, you know, they're like the thing about items in Flesh and Blood is like they've always just been this, you know, they have historically in the past been Magical Christmas Land, where it's like that looks great, but yeah, it's not how the game plays. All right, Polarity.
All right, next up. Speaking of, Polarity Reversal Script. This is a mechanologist action item at rare. This costs 1, so we've just looked at the blue cycle. Now we've got the red cycle almost. It has keyword Crank on it. It also has no defense. None of these have defense. It has Crank, and it says, this enters the arena with a Steam counter. At the start of your turn, destroy this unless you remove a Steam counter from it. Action cards get -1 defense while defending your mechanologist attack actions.
My notes here are this card seems nuts, but might be too cute. So there is another side. There's another card like this that gets +1 attack on your mechanologist cards, and I think that card is actually better because you're more likely to get value out of it. The value's not contextual, and again, things with Crank, you can put additional Steam counters on them. If you're getting that for 2 turns, you're looking at like, oh, I have like mini CMH, like super mini CMH, but mini CMH. This card, more contextual. Your opponent has the agency to block around it. It's still a great endgame finisher. I have it as a C. At best, potential to go up though. I think that I could be wrong about this card and its ability to finish the game. But the thing is like you have to destroy the counter at the beginning of the turn, which is important to note. Like you have to get rid of the counter. Like you can't just you can't save this for the late game.
No, you get this for one. You get this for 1 turn, right? Like either you play this and you crank it and you get the use of it now, or you play it at the end of the combat and you set up for next turn. But then your opponent gets agency, like you say, to decide how to play around the card. I think it's still good. Like there is value to this, but let's just say, okay, you have to attack with 3 attacks to get the value out of this.
Yep.
And also it's action cards,
That's
not
how-
your weapons.
yes.
So you have to play, just to get one card of value out of this, you need to attack with 3 attacks. Or you need to get another counter on this to do it for 2 turns, for instance, which then you're still,
Yeah.
that's a crank counter value.
Yeah.
So I have this like a C minus.
Yeah.
C.
I think that C minus is probably closer to it. So the reason why it's hard is like, even with what you said there, you're like, oh, you have to play it in this manner. It's like, well, you can play it on top of your deck with -IO, and then you can get 2 turns out of it potentially, right? But you pay the additional resource. You could also add a counter to this because there are things that say add a counter to something you have with crank. But there is a hierarchy of items in Bright Lights where it's like, I would want to be adding additional counter to get 2 turns of value off of it, and this is one of the ones slower because it's conditional. It gives your opponent the agency to block around it. But in terms of an endgame finisher, honestly, I'm going to go with an attack action with overpower to finish the game. I'm not going to use this card.
Yeah, I want an overpower card. Let's look at the best card. So, okay, you probably, if your game goes for 6 turns, maybe, right, you're going to see 6 cards off the top of your deck with -IO, right? So it's already, you're already seeing what, at best, a sixth of your deck, right? So you have to also hit those odds to start with, even to see this off the top. And then you have to play it off the top. Like, if you ever draw this in Dash, like, you're still faced with the same problem that everyone else is of, like, the bad value of this card. And it's red, so the flexibility is not particularly great. So, I think you just got to be careful about how many of these kind of cards. But, in the right situation, this card's going to be good.
I think it's too cute. Like, I think I'd just rather have a card that, like, heavy artillery, or rather have a card that's overpower, or rather have a card that doesn't allow my opponent to block with equipment. Like, why jump through these hoops for a somewhat evasive ability, right? Like, you're jumping through the hoop of like an item that doesn't have dual functionality of blocking your deck, an item that costs a resource, and an item that consumes your action point. Like, all those things just like lead to a situation where it's like, ugh.
Well, I know a card you might want to play.
Yeah. And it's called Penetration Script. It's a mechanologist action item at rare, and it costs 1, pitches for yellow, by the way, has crank, and says, this enters the arena with a steam counter. It always says this. At the start of your turn, destroy it unless you remove a steam counter from it. It says your mechanologist attack action cards get +1 attack. I had a B+. I think that this is one of the cards where, if you get 1 turn of value off of it, it's not great. But I think this is one of those cards where you're going to be prioritized putting the extra counter on it. This is a crank item, and if you're able to get 2 cards, my question is like, you want my notes were, you want multiple turns of value of this. 2 should be enough, but the card seems nuts. Like, if you're able to get even more than 2, but 2 is like a great scenario to be in. I think the floor is not devastating as well.
Yeah, I mean, because of boost, obviously, and like the in the right deck, you can, if you get this for 1 turn, you're probably going to get 3 value off of it, right?
Yeah, ideally.
Maybe, yeah. And then if you're able to add a counter, so at that point, it's like it's worth the card you've played, and probably pushes breakpoints, etc. Like, it's pretty good. If you get 2 turns of value off of it with some synergy from other cards, then yeah, I think you're in the B+ range. I have this as a B- because I think there's some build around requirement to this. Like, it needs some support cards, but I do think this is obviously a lot better than the previous one. Script.
Yep.
Yeah. Next up, we have Security Script, which is the blue in this cycle. So it's a 1-cost mechanologist action item at rare. Doesn't defend, has crank, and obviously enters with a steam counter, and says your mechanologist attack actions get +1 defense. So the same thing, if you don't remove a counter, you have to destroy it. Okay.
I don't know.
It's good that it's blue.
Yeah, it's because it's blue. It's not bad. And -IO, right? Because it enters the arena. You get
a combat trick.
Yep. But you don't want to be playing on your opponent's turn. That's the problem. I mean, unless you have to.
That's my problem with -IO.
Yeah. So it enters the arena with the steam counter. You get at the should move from at the start of your turn. So you get 2 turns of value off of it, right? Like 2 turns of blocking value.
This one you can get. This one you can potentially get a little bit more value off of, right? So you can play this past the turn.
This is pretty good. This card's pretty good, Hayden, because it's blue.
Yeah,
so
I think this one might be best.
How much value do you need to get out of this for this card to be good, right? Because we think about the previous card, it's a yellow, and if you get 3 value, so if there was a card that said cost 1, attacks for 3, blocks for 0, you'd be like, that's the worst card I've ever seen in my life. But if you had a card that was, attacks for 2. Or two defense, etc. I don't know. This card is just way easier to get value out of.
I want 4 value out of this.
Yes, and I think that's reasonable. Like, I think that's reasonable. Maybe it's tough contextually with like where you exist in terms of like, are you the beatdown in the matchup? Because if you have to switch tempo, or if like this is not going to agree with your strategy. But this card is flexible as well because it's a blue. So I think this card potentially is the best one. I think it's easy to get value out of it because you're looking over the course of 2 turns with the way the steam counters come off. Yeah, B for me. I think B-. I know I said it higher on the last one, but I don't think this card is breaking the format or anything like that.
I think this is like I had this a C plus B minus. I think it's probably more of a B minus, but you've got to factor all the downsides again. It doesn't defend. You have to use your action point to play it. Your opponent gets the agency to play around in some way, potentially just blocking out your attacks as opposed to attacking to deny you value from the card. Like all of those things. But I think all things said and done, like it's still a very, very good card. Next up, we have Backup Protocol, and there's a Backup Protocol red, Backup Protocol yellow, Backup Protocol blue. So there are different cards. It's kind of like the Fletch with X tail from the last set. So I'll just read out one, and they'll replace the word red with yellow or blue depending on the card. They're a 0 cost mechanical action item at common. They have crank, and they say they enter with a steam counter. Same text. If they start your turn, destroy this unless you remove a steam counter. And they have instant, 2 resources, destroy this, return a red, yellow/blue, whatever color you've played, whatever color the card is. Attack action card from your graveyard to your hand. So this is kind of Memorial Ground, except back to your hand, and it costs you 2 resources. But you can keep it around for a turn potentially.
I had D.
Yeah, I had this as a C minus because like maybe there's some like value on this, but I think it's more like a D. I think these are the kind of items that like I'm really not excited to play in my deck.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the blue one. The problem is
I just wonder if like deck density does matter at some point, and maybe these are relevant, but then you've played a card to do it anyway, so it's like, would I rather just have another card that blocked 3 or it was an attack, for instance?
I was just thinking about the blue one because like you destroy it and you get a blue back, and you pitch for 2 with that, and you're able to pitch for 3 with the blue you got back, but like that's ultimately not good because you consumed your action point.
Just pitch the blue.
Yeah, I know.
Pitch the blue that you had already.
It's just terrible, I think.
And you can net an action point with the blue. A resource point, but you've already had to play a card to do so. So
yeah, these cards are bad. All right, up to Boom Grenade, Acknowledged action item. We're looking at the red one. Cost 0, has crank on it. It says this enters the arena with a steam counter at the start of your turn. Destroy unless you remove the steam counter. When a Mechanologist, and it says when a Mechanologist attack action card you control hits a hero, destroy this, and it deals 4 damage to them. This is a card I've actually seen people get excited about on Twitter. I think it's a good card. The issue is like, I don't know. Is this enough? Like you just land this on the board and it's like your opponent's just like, okay, I literally have to block them out for potentially like 2 turns. That seems kind of nuts. I don't know. Hayden, what are your thoughts on this card? Because they can't let you activate this, right? Like, let's say you don't have a combat trick, because the idea of where it's like, oh, I play this card when I have a combat trick, like, it might be too contextual. So evaluate this without a combat trick. You land this on the battlefield. Your opponent is not presented with, okay, I literally have to block them out for as long as this card exists on the battlefield.
I mean, this card's really good. I think obviously if you can do this at instant speed, right? If you have the ability to like dash IO this, or Evo to put this into play at instant speed, that's really, really powerful, right? Like you're gonna, but let's look at it, right? It's a 0 for 4. Like that is like at red. That is kind of the base of it. It costs you an action point effectively to get into play, but it has some flexibility. It's a little bit different to an attack. It's a hard card to evaluate comparative to a 0-4 attack. But also the other thing is like if they do block out your attacks, and this is 0 for nothing. Obviously, it forces them into that play pattern, but that is a potential downside to what this card could be. So, I think this is going to sit anywhere from like the C plus to like B plus range, and it's really going to depend on your deck. But like the fact that as a base level this can be blocked out, I think that for me puts these in like in that like C plus B minus range for majority of the time.
Yeah, I had C, but this is one of those cards I could see myself being very, very wrong on contextually with like how the format plays out.
It doesn't block though. Like you still got to factor all those things. It doesn't block. It's an item.
Yeah.
Cost an action point. All right. Next up, we have Dissolving Shield. Still more items to come. This is a cycle. So sorry, we should just point that out. Boom Grenade is also a cycle as well. This is a cycle. Dissolving Shield, mechanized action item costs 0. It has crank, and same thing with the steam counters, but this enters with 3 steam counters on it, and then at the start of turn, destroy this unless you remove a steam counter from it. Has instant, remove a steam counter from this, prevent the next 1 damage that will be dealt to you this turn. If this has no steam counters, destroy it. This comes in red, yellow, and blue. They come in with less steam counters depending. So blue with 1, yellow with 2, the red with 3 steam counters on it.
Yeah, I thought this card was terrible. Like,
yeah,
unplayable.
Well, it might be playable in Dash.io, but I don't think it's playable in any others. I think it's like a D, but maybe a C- in Dash. But again, doesn't block, costs you an action point. If you draw it, it's pretty bad. But there is things that we just looked at Boom Grenade, for instance, right? Like this is kind of a semi-counter to a card like Boom Grenade in terms of that you get this into play and then helps you with your blocking, for instance.
But you'd rather be the dude with the Boom Grenade than the dude that needs to draw the Dissolving Shield to counter the Boom Grenade. Like,
yes, of course.
So yeah, I think this card is like unplayable. I think this card is like a D-. It's closing to like the F range for me. It's just bad. I don't know. These are those things. So there's cards that exist like this in every format. Talk about Memorial Ground. Memorial Ground, there was no context. That card was just trash because you were losing a card. But this card looks like that. It's just, it doesn't really do anything. You're not going to get value out of it. Is there going to be some contextual thing in the format where this is fulfilling some sort of weird synergistic role? I doubt it, but that can happen. So looks bad.
All right, move on.
Yep. All right, on to Hadron Collider. It's also a cycle. Item, costs 1, pitches for red, has crank, enters the arena with 4 steed counters. Says when you boost an attack, destroy this. If you do, that attack gets plus X, where X is the number of steam counters on this. So you got a little bit of a threat of activation. You have a 1 for 4 at best. You can obviously put a counter on this with some other items, maybe. But this card, to me, was a D+. I thought this card was bad. I just don't...
So like I would say like at base level, this is at red as a 1 give +3 to your next boost attack, right? Because you can crank and then you can immediately crack it.
And consumes an action point?
Well, you crank it, right? So you get the action point back.
Oh yeah, so you crank it, so 1 for 3? Yeah.
1 for 3. So at that point, so this is always going to be 1 for 3 unless you dash IO it off the top, right? Because either you play at the end of your combat chain for a +3 boost next turn, +3 attack next turn, and then that loses steam count at the start of the turn. So the base of a no defense 1 cost +3 at red is like pretty low, right? Like I think that's in like the D territory, like a C- territory, because you can compare that to a card like our pumps from previous sets, right? What I like about this card, though, is the fact that you can set it up for next turn to push a big attack with potential on hit or push damage to get through. And I think this format, especially in sealed, like it's going to be hard to push damage a lot of the time. There's a lot of cards that aren't particularly great. There's a lot of cards that have average damages. There's still pretty good block and a lot of 3 blocks in this format, and you get a lot of access to cards in your card pool. You need to find ways to push damage. And this sort of setting up for a push damage turn on the next turn, I think is quite good. Like this has flexibility as opposed to just an action, a non-attack action that said, 1 cost +3 to your next attack. So I have this more in like honestly like the C+ range. I think this card is actually pretty reasonable, but is going to be maybe a little bit deck dependent. So I'd say like C+. I think.
All right, D+ for me.
I think you're straight wrong on that one. Like I think like it's a 1 for 3 at worst, right? So I don't know.
I don't want to play 1 for 3 no
playable.
blocks. I don't want to play them. But if it's contextual and like, but yeah, I don't know. It's tough. But
yeah, you're probably right actually.
Yeah. Okay. Next one here. This is your favorite card. This next one.
Yeah, mini force field. So this is another mech action item cycle. It costs 1, has crank, and enters with 4 steam counters if it's red, 3 if it's yellow, 2 if it's blue. You have to remove a steam counter at the start of the turn, or destroy it. And it has ward X, where X is the number of steam counters on it.
Yeah, so I think that one's an F. I said unplayable and limited. By the way, F you, Brian. This is
more ward cards.
Yeah, more ward cards.
I like that this is an interesting Dash.io like instant speed potentially. Like you have a red that's kind of like you would block with or vacate in your hand, and you just play this off the top, pitching your red, and you have ward 4. But you have to then make sure you're getting the full value of the ward, right? Which can be a little bit awkward. I do like that these have like some, like you're going to be putting some extra items in your deck potentially if you go first.
Okay, so there's a reasonable argument there. So if you are playing Dash.io and you play this on your opponent's turn, you are turning a red into a 4 block. No, you're not a red. You're turning a yellow, by the way, because you have to pay 2 for this.
Yes, you're right. Yellow. Yep, correct.
That's good. That is Magical Christmas Land, though.
It's very narrow. Yeah. It is very narrow. And then otherwise you're drawing a red. To be fair, it's like you get to play, you maybe have a free resource and this turns into like a 3 block that just kind of sits on the field for that turn, for the next turn, which is not, honestly, that isn't the worst. Is this filler? Yeah, a lot of the time it's filler. A lot of these items, the first one is going to be okay, but you can only play so many items. So this probably isn't like the D plus C range.
I really don't like this card, but again, you put enough of these cards in a set, and there can be some sort of strategies that emerge from that where they are playable. Other than that,
I think this might be more of a sideboard grade, actually, the more I think about it. Maybe it's like a sideboard CC+.
Yeah. All right. Overload script. Getting out of these cycles, so not a cycle. Mechanologist item, 0 cost, red pitch, has crank, enters the arena with a single steam counter. Says your mechanologist attack action cards get overpower. My grade was build around. What do you think, Hayden? Sounds like something you'd want to be like, maybe, right? So this is you're giving something overpower. It's just like this is I don't know. This card is literally only playable in conjunction with another card that benefits from it. So it's tough.
Yeah, but those cards are readily available. They just boost attack actions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is the sort of card you can take early. Like, this card is just powerful. That's the thing. Like, there's some cards where we've learned, oh, these are build around grades and they require other cards, but like the payoff is not particularly great. The payoff on this is like pretty solid. This is a really good game ender, I think. And you can set this up right.
Yeah, the difference. So the reason why this card is okay is because it says your mechanologist attack action cards. So the entire turn get overpower. So yeah, I think that the miscalculation you can make when you first value this card is like, oh, I play this with like a big attack. It's like, no, you just play this and then you play your big go wide boost attack. And then that's kind of how you kill them, because the more wide you go as well, the less value your opponent could potentially get out of the armor. Where it's like, if this was just dominate on a big attack, they could potentially just fridge it plus a card or whatever equipment they have. Where now you're presenting.
They can still do that.
Yeah, they can still do that. But now you're presenting like ideally like 4/4/4. And then they're like, oh, okay. I don't know. Maybe it's better. Maybe it's better on the single attack. I'm just not sure.
I think it's better on the single attack because I think what you do is you play this, you arsenal your pump, you pass the turn, and then you play your like big Evo upgrade card, or your like just there's some naturally big attacks where it's coming to, and you attack for like 11 overpower.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what I think you want to do with this card. I have this at like B minus C plus range.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, definitely C plus for me, but build around.
Yeah, I think, the build around is really powerful. Next up, we have MHZ script. This is the yellow of the next of the script cycle, I guess. It has crank. It's a mechanologist action item, cost 0. When it enters with a steam counter on it, same text if you remove steam counter start turn, destroy it unless you remove a steam counter, and it says your mechanologist attack action cards get go again.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Very contextual.
Yeah.
My grade was actually, I said I was going to circle back to it after I rated everything else, and I didn't circle back. Yeah, I mean, how close is this to a one card do nothing is my question. It doesn't block for anything.
Yeah, you can play so many of these. This is more narrow, I think, than Overload script, because you have a lot of boost attacks in this game. But there is in the set cards that do not have boost.
Yes.
And I think, there's going to be relevant ways to set this up, but I just think the payoff is not as good as the red. And I mean, we're about to talk about the blue, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Although I will say, like, in terms of crank targets for adding extra counters to, like the red and the blue script that we've just talked about are a couple of the best. Like the value is more than 1, where it is on like Hyperdriver or even say like the Mini Forcer we just talked about. So I don't know. I have this like a C+. I think this card is like fine. It's yellow, so you can pitch it early and set it up for late game with some like a couple of big attacks.
Yeah,
but
these cost 0. I mean, honestly, I'm cranking the Mini CMH. That's what I'm cranking.
Well, yeah, that card. I think that card. The more I think about that card, I think maybe that card is even. I think I brought my card down in that grade, but I think it's even better than I thought.
Yeah. I think
might be more of a B range.
Yeah, it might be format warping. I don't know. It just depends how consistently you can crank on. Yeah, add.
I'm gonna give this one a C plus though.
Okay, yeah. D plus max for me. All right. Autosave script. Crank enters the arena with a single steam counter, blue pitch, 0 cost item, of course. Your mechanologist attack action cards get, when this hits, put it on the bottom of its owner's deck. All right, so this is a do nothing card. This is a D, maybe an F for me. It's an F. Yep, F. It's a blue.
Yeah,
it can't be an F because it's a blue. I don't know. It's a D.
I think it's a D, and it might be in the right deck quite good, right? Like it's a blue you use early, then you get it out before your big push turn as, I don't know, Maxx Nitro, and then you put all those cards to the bottom, and then you do it again. That's so narrow, though. I honestly think it's a D, but it could be potentially a sideboard, like not D.
Funny parallel. There was a card called in Arcane Rising called Cognition Node. It was actually pretty good because the format was all fatigue. And that card is actually pretty good. This card, I don't think it's good. I think it's bad. But format, context is everything. But ultimately, this is a D to D minus for me. All right, next up.
Cogno's also stayed around for the whole game. This does not.
True.
All right, next up is Hyperdriver. A third time this has been reprinted now. This is a Mythology action item. We only get the red one in the set. It says this enters the arena with 3 Steam counters. And when it has none, destroy it. And it says once per turn, when you boost a card, remove a Steam counter from this and gain a resource. Hyperdriver looks really good in the set, just given like all things considered. I think this is like a B minus for me, B minus. This is such a good early pick because it's going to go in every deck and provide you value, and then in decks like Maxx, for instance, or even Dash, you get even more value from this card.
I don't know.
I'm trying to go, I feel like you had like this like a D or something.
Yeah, I did not. I just God, let me. Okay.
So let me sell it to you a bit more, right? I think items, obviously, like if we look at the items, and this is an item that gets you 3 resources over its life, right?
Yep.
I think comparative to a lot of items that we've seen so far, that's quite good.
Okay, you can sell me on that. Cost 1 though. So, like, it's hard to can't draw direct parallel to the 0 costs. I think if you're rating it a B-ish area, you have to compare it to micro CMH.
Yeah, I think I have this at a B minus. I think I might have that card like a B plus, to be honest. I think I would go back on that grade, to be honest. Maybe this is more like a C plus, but I think this is a really good early pick that's going to go into the decks you play and allow you to.
Yeah, this is flexible. I mean, this is as flexible as a 0 cost item gets. We've looked at so many just trash tier items so far, to be honest. Like some of those items are like, oh my god, in this like random scenario, this card still basically does nothing. This card just does something. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, it's good. I think C plus compared to other items. It's good.
Cool. All right. That wraps up the item parts. We've gone through the Evos, the Mechanologists, the items. Now we get to talk about some attack actions.